Nice to meet you again, guys. We continue the topic number 9 because it's focused on the value-based analysis of operating performance, and it's really huge. In the part number 1, we looked through different models that strategic consultancy company apply to make some advices and to provide the consultancy services for large and medium-sized global and national companies in different industries to push them forward to introduce value-based analytics and the value-based management approach in these companies. But today, I would like to focus our attention on a very interesting and really very important problem: how we can adjust the economic profit when we are going to analyze operating performance to the very specific features of some particular business model of particular company in any industry. So that's why today we'll be looking just on those models which are the most adjustable, I would say, that already suggested some interesting approach that we can just take as a framework and then think in more detail and really deeper to adjust that for some particular company and to make our projects within our degree program. And I would like to start with the model which has been introduced by BCG Consultants, Boston Consulting Group, and they are focused on so-called critical or dominant resources of the company. So now we are talking about so-called modified economic profits. And let's see step by step what BCG Consultants suggesting for us. The approach that this consultancy global company applies to push forward value-based management style and mode of thinking in many companies all over the world is related to the very specific form how to calculate economic profit of the company. And it's called cash value added, or CVA. As you see here from that formula, because this is the economic profit, a type of it, it's also based on the spread analysis. But now we are applying the spread, comparing cash flow return on investments to the weighted average cost of capital. You saw in the first part of that topic that SFROI, or cash flow return on investment, this is an approach that has been already suggested by Hold Value Associates. And in the first part, we already introduced some details how we are going to compute SFROI, how we should prepare the data for these particular types of calculations. So we can keep in mind that the same adjustments or almost the same approach just to compute SFROI is applicable for CVA calculations. So that's why some specific of that model is here on that slide that I pointed out. So we have the so-called adjusted rate of return that company really earned. Instead of simply taking the rate of return from the financial reports as return on capital employed, let's say, as we made it for residual income calculations. This approach, CVA, cash value added, is an integral internal part of the integrated approach of BCG Consultants to value-based management, which is called real asset value enhancement integrated model. So this approach through the real asset value enhancement is really interesting, and it's related to the modifications of economic profit depending on the predominant resources in some companies for some specific business models. So that's why I'm going to make an overview about so-called workonomics, which should be focused on the human resource. And I'm also will show you costonomics, which is customer resources. driving. And the last part of that presentation about these modifications is related to the situations when the businesses could be really very keen on their supply chain and how it's built, and it could become the critical for some particular types of businesses. So suppliers-driven approach, which is called here in that system supplynomics, will be also observed, and will make some broader conclusions about these applications. So traditional approach to the analysis of the drivers behind the economic profit of any company are mostly focused on two particular directions or areas. The first says that, of course, if you manage to increase your return on capital employed because you are growing your company and your sales revenue grows and you are properly, nicely, smoothly managing your costs, then your profit margin is growing and return on capital employed will increase. And the second area of improvements for the purpose of increasing economic profit of any company should be related to its investing policy, to the profitable capital employed investment. So if your capital employed, as in this second graph, increases in efficient manner because net present value of all these projects would be above zero, and you will earn additional income and you will generate additional cash flows, and the return on the capital would be above weighted average cost of capital. So you can increase your economic profit just by this efficient investment projects. So you can be focused on the increase in return on capital employed, or you can be focused in the increase of your investment base in an efficient manner, or you can make a combination of both areas, of course. But the model that we are now discussing, integrated model, real asset value enhancer, made specific several points. So the increase in the value per unit could be also reached if you try to get more efficient investments into non-financial capital. If you are using your non-financial capital in a more efficient manner, then the effective growth of your non-financial capital compared to the effective growth of your traditional capital, manufactured capital in your tangible assets will also become a driver behind the positive economic spread. And as well, you may also think in terms of the some cost decrease or cost management per unit of non-financial capital. Further in our course, we'll be discussing this, especially in our projects. We'll be discussing these opportunities for several companies when they will try to get efficient growth in non-financial capital as well as just cost decrease per unit in their non-financial capital, but how it could be implemented in that model. Why do we need at all to adjust to specific business models? Just this simple representation gives some background for argumentation. Let's say in the manufacturing sector, which includes very different several industries, you may have one type of the cost structure. You will see here that material cost on average occupies or has a really big proportion in the costs, and personnel costs, of course, as well. You will see rather big, comparably big depreciation expenses in the cost structure. If you compare that cost structure on the left side on that slide to the retail and e-commerce including, you will see rather different, dramatically different cost structure within the products of these industry, and material costs become the largest one in terms of the proportion within the costs. If then you move forward to the services, including IT technologies, you will see that mostly they are focused on the personnel costs for qualitative production. So from that follows that, of course, when you are computing your economic profit, you will meet the situations that the cost structure, of course, is really different between different industries, and within the industry, of course, between companies competing with each other in this product markets. And it's better if we are capable to adjust the economic profit calculations, focusing on the predominant resource, which provides the largest proportion into the cost structure, let's say for manufacturing, for retail and e-commerce services, as here. So that's why this system, which has been introduced by BCG consultancy company, Real Assets Value Enhancer, includes the attempts and some solutions and some specific computations for economic profit, which could be focused on dominant non-financial capital. We will be looking now briefly through the adjustments for the client's capital, for the human capital, and for supplenomics, which could be just generalized as organizational capital of the company. So we are used to compute economic profit as in the first part of that slide, we are showing on the financial capital, or the so-called capital view. We are used to apply now the capital view on the economic profit. We made it throughout that course. So we computed residual income, which was the spread or the difference between return on capital employed and the weighted average cost of capital multiplied by the capital employed. And now we need to go through these adjustments and try to find the solutions for non-financial capital's view on the computation of economic profit for the companies. And the first slide is now telling some story about the focus on the human capital for those businesses which are mostly dependent on the quality of their personnel, and in the cost structure of those businesses are the expenses for the personnel, for the salaries, for all the bonuses, for all the taxes applicable to this type of resource are really big. So the company is really very sensitive to this particular type of the expense. And this gives the reason for us try to understand whether we can compute economic profit focused on the human resource or the human capital or the cost per person. On the left side of that slide, you see the traditional approach. On the right side, we see an attempt, a representation of economic profit, which is focused on the personnel costs. So we also have a type of a spread here, but it's now represented by value added per person compared to the average cost per person. So this difference then should be multiplied by the number of the personnel the company considers to be productive for the business. On the next slide here, we will see how we are going to compute value added per each per person, bearing in mind the qualified personnel first. So we needed first to start, of course, with the sales revenue. We need then to subtract materials expenses. Boston consulting companies think about this materials expenses as expenses just not only for raw materials, but also including some transportation costs and other costs needed for producing that particular type of a product, but excluding personnel cost. Then we should subtract the depreciation expense on the fixed assets, and if we have intangible assets, we are going to subtract as well amortization expense on the intangible assets. And then we are subtracting, look more carefully on that formula, capital charge, which is the product of multiplying weighted average cost of capital, required rate of return on the overall capital by capital employed. So now we see in the brackets that we are somehow adjusting the computation for the profit of the company, excluding personnel costs from that part of the computation. And then we are comparing the profit, adjusted profit, to the capital charge. And this is again economic spread, but it's now adjusted to the major resource, which is personnel or human capital, their knowledge, and the money the company should spend for the qualified personnel. And then we will get here the economic profit because we are comparing again the profit adjusted without personnel costs with the capital charge, which represents the minimum level of the profit that must be generated for that particular level of risk implied in the weighted average cost of capital by that particular capital employed. And then if we divide it by the number of people that company employs, we will get the value added per person. Then, of course, we need to compare value added per person with the average cost per person. And this is the second approach to analyze the economic spread. So we have our focus on the economic spread twice, because it is in the first computation value added per person, and then we are comparing value added per person, which already includes the capital charge, with the average cost per person. It's now easily can be presented that if you have value added per person well above, higher than average cost per person, then your major resource, which has the largest proportion in the cost structure of your product, is really efficiently used because it provides more value than it itself costs per person for the company. And then we move forward to the second type of possible critical or dominant resource in the company. Now we are looking through the client's capital, and we are looking through the so-called costonomics according to the BCG classification. So the cash value added could be computed as on the left side of that equation, it would be regular residual income calculation, but it's better if we represent cash value added through the focus on the clients for the companies which has huge or large or big proportion of the customer costs inside their cost structure. Analogically, we can see here that we need now to compute value added per customer, but not per one person involved into the qualified personnel. We need now then to compare value added per customer by the average cost per customer, of course, and it would be then multiplied by the number of customers that the company has. So let's move forward, because there are some specific details, of course, in the computation of value added for customers and value added per customer. So we again start with the sales revenue we again subtracted the same materials expense, which involve also without the expenses that are involved into some marketing and promotion activities. So we'll subtract here just regular material expenses, regular transportation costs, some infrastructure costs, some other costs, but not the expenses involved in the marketing and promotion. We'll then subtract the personnel expense again without the personnel costs for marketing and promotion personnel. We will then again subtract a depreciation for the assets, but excluding the depreciation for the fixed assets involved in marketing function, if any, of course. And finally, we still need to subtract capital charge or WACC multiplied by capital employed, but excluding assets involved in marketing and promotion function of that particular company. So the major idea is we are computing value added per customer. So that's why we ignore at that stage of the calculations everything which on the expense side is related to the marketing, advertising, promotion functions in the business. Doing so, we then divide the value added by the number of customers, and we'll get value added per customer. And then it's, of course, reasonable to compare value added per customer with the average cost for customer. When computing average cost for or per each customer, we need to understand how much the company should spend acquiring the customer on marketing, advertising, and promotion, and to retain the clients and to keep their loyalty to that particular business. And again, here we have these two different spreads. The first at the stage of computing value added per customer, and the second when we are now computing the economic profit. So we compare value added per customer to the average cost per customer. And again, what we may say, the company is increasing the value in case when value added per customer, of course, is positive. And then when comparing value added per customer, we'll get much above than the average cost per customer. If value added per customer is lower than average cost to get the customer, to acquire the customer, and to retain the customer, so then economic profit is destroyed by this major predominant resource. And you see, this is really very smart logic to be really focused on that critical type of the resource. Next step, it's about supplynomics. And now Boston Consulting advisors, they suggest that we need value added per each supplier because there could be some companies, of course, when this costs to acquire supplier and to stay in communications with the supplier and to prepare the contracts for the supplier and the materials that you will get from those suppliers represent the major proportion of your structure of expenses per your products. So then value added per supplier also matters for computations, and it also is reasonable to compare value added per supplier to the average cost per supplier. And doing so, you will get additional representation of economic profit idea. So value added per supplier again starts with the sales revenue, of course, minus all personnel expenses, but excluding cost for the personnel, for the people involved into procurement and involved into the logistic involved into all these functions to stay in communications with the supplier. We need also to subtract depreciation expense, but without the depreciation on the assets, on fixed assets, which could be also used for procurement and logistic functions. And we need also to subtract capital charge again, but when multiplying weighted average cost of capital by the capital employed, we are not going to include the assets in procurement and in logistic in the capital employed. And then value added per supplier here in brackets is also a type of the spread, which says that if this term is really above zero, then the company is producing the values, but this is representation of more or less usual traditional approach for spread calculation. But then when we compare value added per supplier with the average cost per supplier, it's the second representation of economic spread for the company, which really depends on the supplier perspective on the costs per each supplier. And again, we need here positive spreads to be sure that the economic profit already produced is really positive. So now, to summarize, we need to say that when we add that particular vision, client's view, human capital view, and supplier's view, we've got three different lenses. We've got three different aspects of economic profit creation. So combining traditional capital view with these three new approaches, we will get much smarter picture how the company is creating and destroying the value. The company will really create the value when in all four dimensions, traditional capital view on one side, clients, human capital, and organizational capital represented here by the supplynomics, we will get positive results computing economic profit or residual income. But imagine if, let's say, your business is very much dependent on research and development expense. If you are, let's say, developing new technologies, and for that you need this research and development expense on the yearly basis, and they could be really large in terms of the proportion in your cost structure of your product, then you, instead of supplynomics, can yourself, by your hands, by your intelligence, create additional dimension for organizational capital representation, trying to compute value added per 1 unit of research and development expenses per each person involved into research and development expenses, looking at the supplynomics as like a benchmark, as an example, how you can interpret partially your organizational capital as a dominant resource for your expenses first, and then as the possible dominant driver for your economic profit creation.